Pow Comic Hour with your host, Andrew Bonner.
And Chris Ramos.
Tonight, we review Parker by Richard Stark, a.k.a. Donald Westlake. Adapted by the legendary writer, artist, Darwyn Cooke.
Darwyn Cooke brings his skills to this old story of gangsters and robberies.
The mafia a bit.
And sort of a James Bondy guy.
Yeah. I would say this kind of reminded me of a parallel to like Sin City by Frank Miller that we reviewed way early on in the podcast, but it's set it in like New York City.
Yeah, in like
it's set out east,
the 40s or something.
In the 60s.
Oh, 60s. What?
Yes.
Yeah. 60s.
Mm-hmm. And so this was really cool. This has been on my shelf, I think, for the past couple of years. And with the latest edition that came out in May of last year, we were kind of looking for new things to read. This kind of came on as we enjoy a good crime graphic novel every once in a while. And I know Chris Ramos here, my co-host, is big into crime and reading crime novels and stuff.
Reading crime, not doing crime.
Not doing crime. Yes. And so, and Darwyn Cooke is one of our favorites. You know, we reviewed New Frontier. And so it was just a big culmination of what actually is this book? What actually is Parker? And so I read it in the Martini edition.
Yeah. So it's actually been, there's a couple of different formats, which is kind of fun. Sometimes we each read a different format. So I actually went down to the local library and got the 4 IDW 9x6 colored hardcovers.
Yes. The small guys.
The small guys, which actually they're kind of cool on the shelf, and actually all the the spines line up, and everything. It was a good quality book. So that's how I read it, as more of I would say a small hardcover,
maybe more accessible.
Yeah.
You could pick it up. You can read on the couch. You can
and the
travel.
Stories really were volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, volume 4, and
sure.
So I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna finish this book tonight and this one tomorrow. So. But Andrew had already purchased the first Martini edition.
Yep, I had the first Martini edition, and then I actually didn't know when the last call. It was Parker, the last call Martini edition. I didn't know like when the last what it meant by the last call. So that meant this was the last works of Darwyn Cooke that he did, like before he passed away in 2016. And it was just the edition that came out, like composing of like the last 2 stories, and then some of the supplemental stuff that came with it. There's some like mini stories, and then Ed Brubaker, who is a very well-known comic book author, writer extraordinaire. He was a good friends with Darwyn Cooke, and he did a story at the end of the second edition that pays tribute to him. So that was like a brand new thing that came with this volume.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot more extras in the back and a lot more like stories than the smaller ones do, because when they sort of, I don't want to say re-released it, because the smaller hardcovers had come out years before these larger Martini editions, which are more like absolute editions.
Yes, they were inspired by it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The saying goes in a brief like forward by Darwyn Cooke. He was working with his editor, Scott Dumbier, who used to work at Wildstorm, now worked at DC for a little bit, but they were both Scott inspired and created the Absolute Edition at DC Comics, which we've reviewed several Absolute Editions, and we think they're super awesome because they're like iconic stories.
Including New Frontier.
And they were blown up to that size, so when they were working on Parker, when they had the time and stuff, Darwyn Cooke was a big fan of that work. Scott was as well. And IDW loves, publishing books and stuff, and especially with different properties. They're like, yeah, let's blow it up. Let's make this, the actual size that he worked on, or at least close to, those originals, and just let that artwork flow out and bring what they could to the table. So
yeah, and as far as the artwork goes too, you'll see a big difference from a smaller format to a larger format. Most comic book artists would rather benefit from a larger format, and neither of these have glossy pages. Yours doesn't have glossy. Yeah.
No, these are all matte.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep. So it actually really does translate into that old school feeling, just to sort of match how Darwyn Cooke naturally has his style. His style is
yes,
very, once you see it, I mean, a lot of this, I think people might sort of pick up on, like Batman the animated series and things, inspiration wise and things.
sure.
So it's almost like stylized, almost really, I think, I don't want to say simplistic, but like just really like an
Yeah,
interesting style where he doesn't draw lines all over that aren't needed.
right.
He puts a great use of each sort of brush stroke.
They're very
Yeah.
purposeful.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
His character work in these 4 volumes that came out were just stellar. I don't I want to call it his magnum opus, but I really like New Frontier.
Yeah.
But I mean, Cook spent a lot of time on both these books. New Frontier just came out before it, and that was his big. I wanted to do kind of flex his skills as an artist and try to show what he could as a writer as well. And when he got to Parker, he this was kind of at the end of his career, and this was like his big passion project because he loved the Parker series that Donald Westlake built or wrote, and he was very passionate about it. And I don't think though that series was it was kind of under the radar. I think for some people that came up, unless you were in the know and you read
Hmm.
it. I think some of the his friends had it like on the bookshelf as hardcovers and stuff, but it never was illustrated. It was never, how do you picture that and stuff like that. There were some movies that were coming out in that time that we'll mention later in the podcast, but it was really cool to for him to flesh those ideas out.
Well, and like even parts of his drawings are filled in. What he did was a lot of just black inks, and then each book had sort of its own color scheme, or slightly colored paper. The first book has like a yellowed paper, and then everything's
Yeah.
black
And
ink.
you're like, is it like my copy? Is it
Yeah,
not?
so
No.
like
And you're like, they purposely made it just to give this like vintage feel to it,
yeah, it's
or
like
just kind of put you in
not
that
bleached out.
mindset.
I mean, it's like a yellow stain almost,
Yeah. It's like
Um,
aged, I guess.
yeah,
That's
and it
that's probably what
really
it is.
helps to me. It helped bring you like hyper into the story, and you were sort of glued to that page because it's unlike a color that you've seen before. So you're just really like on those details. And then he just did like a wash of watercolor to sort of fill in a lot of details with the page and
Yeah.
kind of put a general idea like this is like a reflection from the water, or this is a cloud, or this is the rest
Sure.
of his face. If you look at like some of his drawings of people, um, he's only really drawn like their eyes, nose, mouth, and then sort of the rough
Yeah.
outline of their hair. And then
Sure.
he fills in the other features with just the blue wash, which is really a
Yes.
unique way to do
So
it.
each story, for or at least the large majority of them, it's only until later that maybe it's a little bit of the same, but they have each individual one had a distinct color. There
Yeah.
was no it was like he used white, black, and then whatever color he wanted to associate with like the story. So like this one has like a I don't know, a pale blue.
Yeah. So
Um
Hunter has more of that. Yeah. Like a pale blue.
pale blue.
And then the outfit is the next story
Yep.
in these smaller books. Now, the larger book actually
Yep.
had some other stories get
Yes.
filled in between, which was
Yeah.
cool.
The man with the getaway face that had like a almost like a blotted out. It was started with orange, but it's like a very faded orange.
And I think you can find that separately
Yes.
outside of this.
Yeah, so back in the day when they released it as almost like a single issue, but it was oversized format just for to get new readers in, and then just fill in some of the gaps as well. So it was really cool, and it filled in like you can follow some of these characters after like you see them in the following story. So you're like, oh, that's where this character, that's how he met the character that they're interacting with. This is where they made friends. And like, okay,
Boy, and as you're flipping through that manila paper is
yeah.
like it's odd in the binding. It makes it like really like
Oh
highlighter
yeah.
yellow. It's,
Uh-huh.
it's
It's
just a weird
cool.
color, but it's
Yeah.
it connects you.
And these are as a person, as I guess we are as like podcasters and people reviewing these collected editions, these are some of my favorite collected editions that I have.
It's definitely what I really, really enjoyed about it. And I know we're just sort of like randomly hopping around in the podcast, but what I really liked about it is that it wasn't based on, and I don't want to keep saying superheroes. I don't want to keep saying like we only read superheroes because we've actually read quite a few,
We're
like
starting to get
a
more
lot.
robust.
Yeah,
We're
like maybe
feeling the
half of what we
paladin.
read
Yeah.
is not superheroes. But it was really great to kind of bring you back down to like basic sleuthing, basic private investigator kind of feel,
Yeah.
basic like clubs and sort of seedy outfits and things, and then realize like one gunshot is like that's it, you're
Yeah.
toast. Like, and kind of bring it back down to just sort of real life, so you're not thinking that someone's going to, you know, throw someone into a building or something
Sure.
like
And
that.
I mean, some of those crime thriller comics that kind of started out, I mean, they weren't that intricate. They couldn't have been that intricate. It's
Yeah.
kind of dialing it down, but adding some intricate like story into it and things like that. Kind of, I don't know. It's very cinematic. So you can tell like, oh, people would be inspired to like do movies by it and stuff like that.
Now, when I was reading volume 1,
Yes. So I guess we could name off the 4 volumes, I guess.
yeah,
So it's the hunter and
the outfit
the score, and then
and Slayground.
Yeah.
And Slayground was kind of a shorter story. It was not quite as long as the others.
Yeah.
But when I was first reading, like right when I first got into the hunter, one thing I noticed right away was it was to, if I was to be kind of pros and cons. One of the cons was that the names were hard to connect a little bit to who they were talking about.
I do agree.
Right away, it was like,
Yeah.
okay, so there's this guy, but he's a mob boss. But like, there's this guy, and he's a friend of his,
Yeah.
and he was a friend 20 years
It
ago,
did-
but then he double crossed him.
I did
was
when
a
I
little
was
hard.
reading Hunter. I did because once you start to, when you get done with the Hunter and you kind of fill it in, reading the rest of the series was a little easier to go into.
Yep, I
Because
got
you
that
know
too.
what the players are, I guess, or you're familiar with like the players. You're familiar with what the voice that Darwyn Cooke is trying to establish as a writer,
Right,
and kind of the tone.
and
is going
like
for it.
I was a
Yeah.
little surprised by just the way that Parker reacted to things.
Sure.
At first you were like, oh, he's like the good guy, right? But he's
No,
kind
yeah.
of not. He's like an antihero.
Sure. And I guess this that's a good segue. So Parker is, we're gonna say it's for like, it's a bit of a mature book.
Yeah.
There's some mature themes in it.
And there is some language a little
Yeah.
bit. Some of the drawings aren't like super realistic, so they're sort of like graphically comically, but I mean, there is
and
some
he was trying to
nudity.
make it feel authentic to 60s and 60s politics and mentality and things
Mhm.
like that. So we just want to tell people up front, just because if you go into this and you're like, whoa, why did he do that to the person?
Well, like when people got shot, it's always like a explosion, sort of like
yeah,
like
yeah,
a
it's still very
burst.
cartoony in
Yeah.
that aspect of it.
So
too.
you
But
don't
they're
really
just,
see-
like, they talk about and refer to like some mature themes and stuff.
Yeah,
so.
that's true. That's a good point to say.
So, but so how the hunter, like the first page, it says, just to introduce like kind of like the character, it goes, when a fresh-faced guy in a Chevy offered him a lift, Parker told him to go to hell.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, okay, where's this going? Okay. And then
He just pushes his way through things.
yeah,
He's
first
just
page,
like,
and then
that
it
kind
goes,
of thing.
screw you. And then how Darwyn lays out the page is he's showing you like what he's doing as he's driving, how people are reacting to him, what he looks like on the city way, things like that. And as Ramos was getting to, we come to find out he isn't the James Bond that we kind of think he might be. He's more of like, I kind of thought of him as almost like early Punisher.
Well, yeah, like I guess
Like that anti-hero.
yeah, but like the hero part of it isn't really, think about it. Think the whole story now.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I guess there wasn't like heroic. I mean,
No.
there were. He's mostly a, like a bank robber.
Yeah.
Like a very smart bank robber, but he's also, a man of opportunity.
Yep.
He also will take a job if it's pays well and he feels like he doesn't have to he won't get caught.
Sure,
Um,
he's still very in it for himself,
yeah,
but he does respect the rules of the game, I guess you wanna call it, or
right. And like
how business this type of
if
business or
someone
stealing is
fingers him, like
conducted.
double crosses him,
Yep.
he will find you, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
he does hold to the gangster
Sure,
code
if
of
you like
honor.
Goodfellas, Godfather, Gangs of New York, you know that the code of things that is very much in here as well.
And the other part of it too is like there's um, moments in the story where he does get the girl, or like he does
Yes.
say, okay, that's my last job, I'm never doing anything again. And then it's like, oh,
Eh.
someone comes up with like, hey, I got a
I got
good
a new
one.
deal, yeah.
All right, I'm
Right.
back. Like,
Yeah.
so he is exactly that character that isn't cliche, but he is that one character that you see of like always coming back to do that one last robbery,
Sure.
like
And
Ocean's 11
it's
sort of.
cliche in a very tasteful way.
Yeah.
I did like that. It wasn't like you grow on and go, "Oh, we're back at it again."
And there were twists and turns in the
Yeah.
story that actually made sense, and then also made it more enjoyable. I think um, just like with anything that we like to review is that you have to connect the artist to the writing, to the look, to the format, to the story, to and
It
and
all connects
these
together.
these were super super enjoyable.
Yeah.
I mean, I got through 4 of them probably in 6 days, maybe 5 days. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
it's
I kind of
try not to
I'm bad
fly.
because I'm the binge guy and I have nothing better to do. So
You're like, I'll read through this in an hour.
so
I try not to.
I probably did. I think probably a story a day maybe at the start, and then when I got to the last call, the second volume, I read that all in sitting. Um,
I did too. Yes,
yeah,
like Slayground.
Slayground and
Yeah,
and the score, I was like, I'm in it. Let's do it. Um, because I think Hunter takes a little bit longer to get through these process, and you might have to do a bit of rereading. But once you get it and you keep continuing, you're like, okay, I want more. Um,
well, and it also shows, just to sort of touch on this, Darwyn Cook's hand in it all. It does show that he really cared about the story. You can tell
yeah,
that right away,
right,
and that he was thinking about how is he going to lay out these pages where he's not giving away too much, of the
sure,
story, and he's also like ready for the big twist, or some other unforeseen double cross.
yeah.
You always
How
kind
to
of have
set it
that
up?
feel, yeah, and that's how I think pairing the artist to the story really worked well in this, because that's the type of characters he draws, the
Yes.
facial expressions, the way that he draws
Right.
women.
How are they reacting to it? What would they do? He was giving a really good voice for the character, and
Yeah.
just how would they react to Parker if they came upon him or they did a deal behind his back? Okay, there's gonna be some significant consequences.
And he does a really good job of like pacing out the pages too. That sometimes when there's a lot of action, it moves the story super fast. So then you could
Yes,
tell then he starts slowing down a little bit.
sure.
And in
I
the first volume, his artwork is pretty structured. There's really nothing that goes off the wall a little bit. He doesn't
No,
get like too.
I think he's pretty deliberate, and but he wants to use his paneling and his art to tell a story. I think more than words sometimes. Like the
Yeah,
first like what
that's yeah.
5 6 pages, it's just there's no words or it's very minimal, and it kind of you like you said, he was very influenced when he did animation stuff. So
Hmm.
we talked about like what's going on between the panels, how are the characters interacting. This is a prime example of how that's going. Like
Right.
he wants you to figure out, okay, he's acting with this expression but he's changing slightly. What's he doing? How is he feeling about it at the moment? And that I was like, oh, you're so smart, Darwyn Cook.
Yeah.
This is why you're one of my favorites.
And then when the first volume ends, the second volume is the outfit, and I
Yeah,
feel like he got not more cartoony, but he really loosened up a lot more,
sure.
and he was okay, sort of
Yeah,
doing different camera angles, I guess, if you want to say it that way.
yeah,
Um, and some of the dialogue gets a little more like
sure.
I don't know,
And I guess just
Cagney a little
to
bit.
fill that in, the man with the getaway face, the sole purpose of this story is to set up that
So that was between
set up
volume
the
1 and
outfit.
volume 2.
Yes.
Okay.
And what I liked about it in these collected editions was it feels like every story connects to each other.
Mhm.
So some characters that will be in the hunter, it will be in the getaway face.
Yeah,
Like
they do carry it through.
a
Yeah.
significant thing happens in the getaway face, and that changes. He goes through all three volumes like that happened. And he makes it stick and it makes it matter.
Well, and like in The Hunter, it's really just him.
Yeah,
And then in the outfit, you start realizing that he
he's got a
is
few closer friends,
he
you
yeah,
know.
well, he's got that like, John Wick kind of like people know him
Hmm.
in the know, and he's like, it's Parker. And then everyone's like, oh no way. Like
Yeah,
he's
he's kind
feared.
of becomes myth. He's kind of the
Yes.
boogeyman, you
He's
know.
feared, but he's also respected. And if he said, hey guys, I need you to help me out on this job or whatever,
Sure.
their first question is, what's our take? Right. But like
Yes.
at the same time, they do respect him enough to know that um, he doesn't cut corners and that he wouldn't purposely
Right.
walk them into like something that would harm them, like a trap.
Yep. He wanted people that were familiar with, being a thief, but were also smart, who went rat. He never gets caught by the police. He usually has people that usually, I don't know, maybe paid him off. I don't think he does. He's not really too police, uh, oriented, or he's trying to pay him off the bribe or something. But he
Yeah.
wants to have them aware. It's not till later on that becomes a factor. But it's always like going after this mob boss because he double crossed him after he set him up with the job, or one like murders his wife, and he won't forget that, or stole his wife and
Yep.
murdered and stole a wife, and he's not gonna forgive him. They always have like a hideout.
Well, I always like too, like he gets together a few guys, he tells them the plan,
Yep.
and one guy's like, "Nah, I'm not in," right? And then he leaves, and then you just think like, okay, well, that's sort
Yeah.
of the honor among thieves of
Right.
like, I've heard about this, it's not for me. You guys have a great time, and
Yeah.
you know that he's not going to go and turn him into someone because what's he gonna do? Go to the police? So
Yeah.
it is
It is very much. I think you nailed it. Yeah, honor among thieves.
yeah, and
Absolutely. He
it
kind of
is
builds
fun
his
because it
companionship.
puts you in that like it puts you in that world and you feel like, all right, now I'm part of this gang too,
Sure. And so along the way, as like Darwin Cook starts developing these panels, I really respect that he does mapping and all these extra things that help you illustrate the story and fill in like, okay, so I guess this was in the outfit. He maps out the route of which he delivers the mail that goes out to his gang buddies.
Yeah,
Um,
like from New York,
and from
right?
New York, he lays out like a map of like, and kind of does like the itinerary, like here we start here, we make a stop, we grab lunch, we stay the night, then we'll go to here, because so he doesn't establish a trail or a pattern that people could pick up on. So I thought that was like Darwin Cook didn't have to give this to us, but he
Mhm.
did because he was like, I know you guys.
He does that really well. He also does like um what's the best way to say it? So like Parker and his friends are always sort of holding themselves taller and they're stronger and they just look like they mean business and they're
Yeah,
just like experienced, and some of them are kind of like smiling all the time, or some of them are just sort of that uh, A frame, tall,
yep,
broad shoulders. And then when he gets to like the crooked people, or like
sure.
the boss's boss, or like the gangsters bodyguards, he draws them kind of like goofy and lanky and like overweight and
Oh,
balding,
sure.
and so he does a really good job of like giving everyone their own sort of character. And some of people you're like, I want to know more about that guy, or I want you
Right.
to do a
And he
story
might
about
bring that
him.
guy back if you're like, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
he
know.
makes memorable characters with
Sure.
that.
He also, I think this was in the outfit where he talks. There's a story in which he talks about, this guy, the mob boss got robbed like 10 times, right? He lost
Yeah.
over like $1 million, and so he talks about, oh, this is the latest one that happened, and Darwin Cook like takes a break from doing all these, styled panels and
These
really interesting
illustrative
layout.
panels, yeah.
Yep. And then he takes kind of a stab at like prose and just doing a different way. And I'm not usually a prose guy anymore, so I'm like, I don't know about this. But it's called the Club Cockatoo Raid, And I was like, "Oh, I'll try reading it." Usually I skip this part, but I'm like, "Oh, I'll try it." It was so captivating for me. I'm like, "Oh, this is kind of cool." Okay, and he does give some illustration so you could lay it out,
Yeah, but
but
it's
he
almost like a short story,
it is
and it reads the same way as the rest of his um,
comic,
text
yeah.
bubbles
Sure.
comics.
Yeah.
So it was quick little sentences or quick little like here we go, Rico, with this way. And
Right.
Rico cut the wheel and switched off the ignition. Like just
Yeah.
sort of like it kept you moving through the story.
But that was really interesting just to change up the format a
Hmm.
bit and just, flex his muscles a little bit. Then he goes on to like what was this one? It was called like the turf. Yeah, it was like turf and the sport digest and it's like Del Mar. The next day, so he talks about another crime story that had like another instance that the money was stolen.
Well,
Except he
so
changes his whole style.
but I think what he did too, the reason why he did this was the main story he's writing has Parker as the character, and
Yes.
Parker is the main character, and that's how he's illustrated. And when he
Right.
goes off to tell a side story about other people, that first one is like a novel. The second one is almost like instructions to a board game, sort of.
Yeah, it's
It has
very
like a
similar to board game.
really old school feel, like like old Pink Panther or something,
Okay.
like really old Rocky and Bullwinkle kind of
Okay.
stuff. Like that's the art that he's decided to tell this particular
Yeah,
story.
and it was so cool because you do get to see some of these characters come back and other stories, but this is like where they started, and it's simplistic, but and it's a little busy.
Yeah,
But
a
if
little
you just
comical too.
it's
Like
too comical, so it's not taking itself super seriously. But it's just so it shows so much over so little, and it's just he's playing with a different format, and that seems so interesting to me, especially when we see a lot of different styles and things like happen. It's like, oh, we can do a little bit of everything.
yeah,
So
like it shows that Darwyn Cook actually has
does like a
like
yeah
eight different styles that he can draw at
yeah
any moment.
right. He does this like bank robbery, another bank robbery where he actually goes to the bank and does like the specific payout and stuff like that. He
Yes.
illustrates the money and like the math that it would take and how much he was getting from these like melee people. And it
Well,
was
and it
like,
was weird too because he was explaining how these high level like white collar crimes
yeah,
work.
right,
Like
yeah, breaking it down to like the
yeah,
intricate detail.
like this is how a horse race gets fixed, and
Yeah,
this is how
yeah, he broke
uh
that down to like,
yeah,
I was like,
like
holy crap,
oh
like
like someone
that's
put
very explicit.
yeah, someone puts a dime in and gets a bet, and then that
Yeah,
dime gets turned into a
yeah.
a
Where does the
25
money
cents,
go?
and so
Like, how
yeah.
does it build up and
And then what broker
system?
needs to
He
take it to the
develops this.
collector
He
and all of
shows the
that.
whole system, and I'm like,
You're like,
wow,
"That works, huh?"
okay,
It's a step by step on how to do crime, in case
yeah,
anyone wants
yeah.
to
I
read.
was like, wow,
And then it
that's
gets
so
back
interesting. Yeah,
to Parker. But, the nice part
yeah,
is while you were jumping away, like, you immediately saw that, you know, number one, Darwyn Cook has different ways of illustrating, but also that there's this whole world of crimes versus organized crime
yeah.
versus Parker, and they all interconnect, so the story again keeps you, because if the
Engaged.
story wasn't really engaging, yeah, then
Yeah,
you'd be like kind of lost, right?
right.
And that's where I think a lot of people give a lot of credit for Parker, is because you you're in the story, you're not like, okay, well, where's this going? Like
Sure.
at any moment I wasn't like, well, now what are they,
Yeah.
I think it was really, really great.
And, even though Parker is not the hero of the story, he is not the villain either. And that makes him very interesting because how he plays out certain scenarios and situations, how he trusts people. I
Or
think
like
that
when
was
he
so cool.
takes hostages, he's always
Yeah.
very nice to them.
Yep.
He always
Yeah.
asks their
He
name.
uses ask their
You
name.
know,
What do you do? Okay.
it's like, all right, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to tie you up, but come on
Sure.
over here. And it's like he is very nice. He doesn't want people to just get killed for no reason, and he
Yeah.
doesn't want every job that he does to be just this giant
Yeah.
body
So it makes
count.
him for a very compelling character to follow. So that was really interesting. Um, So out of the four stories or volumes, Ramos, what was your favorite ones?
Well, pretty easy. My favorite one was the outfit, but then when I read the score, I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
that's really good
I'm
too."
okay.
I was
You will
like,
see
"Okay,
us
I don't
air
know which ones."
fiving.
Yeah.
Picture us air fiving because those are the two that I was like, these
As
are
soon
like
as I
so
finished
good.
outfit, I was like, "That was
That's
awesome."
awesome.
And then
Yeah.
once you finished the
So
score, you were
and then
like,
you're like, oh,
"That's
that's really
pretty
good
good."
too.
Yeah, like
I think I like the score a little bit more, but the outfit was because everything he builds in here pays off in score,
well, and I
and
think I
just like
like the
that.
outfit because for me, that has a definitive like high moment when I read it for the first time. Like that
Sure.
was like, okay, this is how it's meant to be. This is great.
Yeah.
And then the score, not that he used sort of the same like energy, I guess is a good way to say it,
Hmm.
but um it was a lot more like an actual movie to me, where
Yeah.
like the outfit was like a really good story turned into a comic,
Sure.
and where like the score was like um what you would think a movie was now translated into a comic, I
Okay.
guess. If that's,
Yeah.
you know.
And the only story that was the other supplemental story in this first volume was the seventh, where Parker works with starts a job, but he works with like an amateur, and he's like, I'm not sure about this guy, but I'll go along with it, even though it's one against one of my
Oh,
rules.
that was in here.
No, oh, you got? Did you get the seventh?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, let
Okay,
me see.
that was kind of cool because you got to learn like he really has to trust, like how he builds like trust with people, and he's like, this amateur just robbed us. And he feels so pissed about it. He's like, I'm going after that guy.
Yeah, that is in here. I don't know if it's in the beginning,
Sure.
but no, that you're flipping through and that looks very familiar to me.
Yeah. So even though this is not almost like standalone compared to everything, you just kind of build up like, okay, this is another, well, facet of Parker's like mentality and how he deals with the situation. And you never hear so much about like a new person coming in the circle or an amateur. Usually
Right.
he doesn't work with amateurs, so it was like the one time he did, they crossed him, and the amateur learned. He
Well,
learned.
and it also just cemented that he never slows down. Like
Right.
once he's got you in his sights, and if you've done any wrong to him, he will find you. And that
Yes.
to me was that again, yes, a little bit of the Punisher, but also kind of like, if we were to compare it to some of the newer ones, John Wick feel, things like
Sure.
that.
Well,
And but yeah, the score was definitely all of the um all of the tools in Darwin's toolbox came out because
sure.
he drew little like maps. It had a little fold out. Even the little
Oh,
books have a fold out.
I think that in Slayground. The fold out
Oh, that
was.
was in Slayground. Never
Yeah.
mind.
Well, I guess we could
But
talk about the fold out quick. So the fold out that we both had, and it was surprising that we both had it.
yeah, like the little books. I'm like, what is this
I thought
little?
I was just in this one. I was like, oh, did you get it? It's like, yeah, I got that too. I'm like, wow. So the
Oh, and
fold.
look, the seventh is all the way at the end of
Oh, okay.
Slayground, so
Okay.
it's just tiny. All the way.
Sure. Oh, that's interesting where they put that. That makes sense. But the fold out. So in Slayground takes place at a amusement park. Parker's held up there because he just got finished this robbery, but the cops are on his tail, and so he's going to escape. And it's in the winter, so normally I can't remember where the city is quite yet, but it's snowing there, and it's blizzard conditions, and but people could still get around, and he hides in this amusement park, holed up in there waiting for the cops to come get him or just so he can pass them off and escape. So what Cook does while he's telling and describing the story, we talked about mapping and things like that. He made an actual fold out of the whole park. It was called Fun Island because there's different attractions and stuff like that. So there's like Alcatraz Island, Hawaiian Island, New York Island, Treasure Island, Voodoo Island, Pleasure
It's
Island.
almost like a old school, what you would consider like a old school
Yeah, like World's Fair or something like
Coney
that,
Island or
or
something.
State
Yeah,
Fair or whatever you have it. And he illustrates like what's going on in the park.
yeah.
Is there any rides? Like Galaxy Quest is in like Island Earth, the tickets booth,
The
different
wax
fast, yeah,
museum. Yeah,
Alcatraz Wax Museum. Exact Snake Huts and Voodoo Island Funhouse. Like, there's parts where now that you know where these are, when Parker comes across, it's like, oh, I know where that is. Okay, I can just look it up on my handy dandy map. I'm like,
And Slayground was really fun because, like Andrew said, so Parker, um, he did a job, and then when he was like climbing over the fence into Fun Island
yeah,
to escape, the cops were just watching him across the street. Like he was climbing over, and then they
yeah,
were like, "Hey, look at that!" And he's literally carrying this bag of money, and he's like
yeah.
climbing over
He's
the
got
gate.
like almost 80 grand. I think
Yeah,
it's like 75
and
thousand
you're
dollars.
wondering like, why aren't they chasing after him? And then you realize that they were, crooked cops. So
Yeah,
it
they're
was
in it for the money part of it, so they could split it.
so they heard on the radio that he had made away with a ton of money. So
Yeah.
it turns into like a Home Alone thing where he has
Yeah.
to
Oh,
like set
absolutely.
traps,
Yeah. Set traps
because he
within the
knows that
amusement
they're
park.
coming for him, and he
Mhm.
knows that they're crooked cops. So he's
Yeah.
like, no one's coming to arrest me. They're
Sure.
coming to kill me and take this money.
Yeah. Oh man. And even though this almost felt like not it didn't relate so much to the hunter or the score or the outfit, but it was a little more standalone in that
Mhm.
capacity. But at the same time, it was so much
Yeah,
fun.
that story. So that story was fun.
Yeah.
The score was like uh really detailed. Like
Yes.
how are they going to pull off the biggest job they've ever tried to pull
Yeah.
off? We'll say,
Mhm.
um, and how are they going to do that? And when when the score starts, they are putting together their team, which eventually comes out to like 8 people, 9 people, so
Yeah.
then now you're juggling all their personalities, all the
For
different types
sure.
of all their looks,
And
and
he's the one that's
Darwin
planning
does
it,
good. Yeah.
planning the heist.
Yes.
So it's like he's not usually the planner. He's usually the hired gun, the mercenary, the guy who gets the stuff done.
Yeah, where he's like, "Tell me the plan," and then he's like, "Now your plan sucks," and then he
Yeah.
walks away.
So yeah. No, he is the one that is basically he's called in for the expertise to pull off this stunt. So that was kind of interesting, just a different dynamic of his character. So how would he deal as the planner of the heist? So that was super cool.
And in some comics that we read, there's always that feeling that they need to uh, push action, and they need to push
Sure.
the narrative along really fast because it's kind of like you have to continually throw these nuggets out to the reader to keep them entertained, right? So they're always like, yes, we're going to set this up, and then boom, this happens, and then we'll set this up, and wham, that happens, and so you're kind of continually being fed this exciting change of events.
Yeah.
Well, in Parker, I found myself way more involved in the actual story and the
Sure.
actual like who is doing what and why, more than I
Yeah.
was
What
like
are their motivations?
yeah, more than I was waiting for like the next gunfight, or I
Right.
was waiting for the next you know police to come
Yeah,
busting
because
in
there
or something.
he's very or the story is very meticulous in the planning of how this happens.
Yes.
Yeah, we get to know more how this happens versus okay, we seen the gunfight, it happened, done. We get to see like here's the before, here's all the planning, and then here are the consequences of
Mm.
what happens. Sometimes it goes well. He gets a set off in the sunset. Somebody might have died, but he still gets away fine.
Well, I like that one time in the score where that kid wakes up in the middle of the night and goes running down the street.
Yeah.
He's like broke curfew, and then he gets caught by one of the robbers,
Mhm.
and you're like, "Oh no, what's going?" And then
Yeah.
the robbers just like ties him up and leaves him.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh, all right, well that was cool." I mean, but it was a good, when that stuff kind of happens, I always think like, why did they take 2 pages to do that?
Yeah. Why
And
does it matter? Yeah.
yeah, and I think it mattered to show that again, they just keep pushing the narrative that these guys are not out to just, slaughter everybody in
No.
sight, and that they still, tie people up. And once you're tied up and they put a little piece of tape across your mouth, it's like, that's it. In this world, you're done.
Yep.
In this world, you are out of play.
Oh, sure. I mean,
Um,
when he held up the bank people or the no, even the phone company. When he held up the phone company, he didn't one of his supporting characters, one of his friends, when he bought the phone company, he hooks up with one of the
Yeah.
phone
He's like,
girls. And I was
he's the
like,
goofy
he's the
guy.
goofy guy,
Yeah.
he's the lighthearted one. And that's kind of funny to follow along his story. So I was like, okay, all right. Parker's doesn't really know that's happening. He's like, he goes,
So they're still human.
yeah, so they're still human. Yeah, they're not cutthroat. They're very much, they're in for the money, but there's more personality. They're very robust characters.
Yeah, it's not like a SEAL team was just unleashed or anything.
Yeah.
These are guys
They intended
who,
to be, but they weren't.
right? Yeah, these are guys who have meetings in suits and then they go off in their black undercover outfits kind of thing.
Where it's like like the twist is like, oh, this betrayal happened. It comes really out of nowhere, but it doesn't. But you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming. I was like, that was very intentional. Like it wasn't too predictable. And I think,
Yeah, like like Ocean's 11 or something
yeah.
like that.
Oh yeah, so much of that. Yeah, I could see that being an influence actually.
So another thing that really got me about the score was like at the end or in the back, he has special thanks to a bunch of his friends, and then he's in parentheses has the names that he used in the comics for them. So like Jimmy Palmiotti
Yep.
was Palm.
Huge
and,
DC writer.
Yeah, Michael Cho was Cho, of course.
Yeah, huge artist.
And Jim Steranko is in here.
Yeah, Jim Steranko. Yeah, even though I don't think he was I think he was he only Marvel, or maybe he did little DC or something like that.
Yeah, but I think he also was just well known by everyone. So,
sure, he may have been huge in the comic book community.
Yeah, so it was funny when they
S.H.I.E.L.D.
first sort
and
of showed him
comics.
in comic form because he immediately gave me Jim Steranko vibes. I was like, oh, that guy's kind of like Jim Steranko. And then at the end, I was like, oh, it's intentional like him.
Sure.
I mean, look at his like little. I mean, that's
Oh yeah,
very
that was
much.
Steranko. Okay,
Yeah,
because he just looked like a cool old guy.
yeah. Pop Phillips.
But knowing that he was supposed to be, Jim Steranko. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, great. And
He was
the whole
Pops.
time-
Yeah.
And the whole time he was just really like cool.
Because he
like
was
a cool,
the elder thief that's been around a little bit. He's like, oh, I could help with that.
should have put him in like colored glasses and stuff. But yeah, so it was really cool that he was incorporating his friends and other people, and he does forwards, and he has I think Darwyn just wanted to just have fun with it and just show the fun,
kind
story.
of pay homage but show fun at the same time.
And then also show a different way to illustrate violence, and that's really, really, really.
Well, that's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah,
yeah, like here's violence. People do get shot. Yes, this guy died, and yes, but he's illustrating it in a way where it still happens, and people always get like smacked by the butt of the guns. That's always like a big deal.
Yeah.
And he shows it, and he kind of like emphasizes it with swoops in the background or splashes of color, but at the same time there's no extended violence. It's always sort of like one hit and it's like he moves on. And so for you
he
as the
doesn't
reader,
drag it out very much.
yeah, like no one's getting tortured and stuff.
No.
So
versus like a Sin City or Frank Miller, that was very strenuous and things like that. He really wanted to make an emphasis on what
where like bandaged up and everything too. Yeah.
So it's kind of like the flip side of that.
I mean, if you want to say it was dialed down, I don't think so, because in this format, it's a big deal still.
It is, yeah.
So he's not like showing violence just to add some sort of sensationalized, flair to it.
Sure.
He's just sort of like, these are violent guys. This guy got in their way, and that's it. Moving on.
Right. Yeah. Makes it feel authentic with the time, like we said earlier, and things like that. So it's not totally out of left field, but you're like, and things like that happen.
So for the different formats, I mean, my smaller books just had the 4 stories.
Yes.
And we always talk about what is the difference between like an omnibus or a absolute or, some other, what they're calling here the Martini edition, or some other places might have a, artist's edition. For me, those books are more sought after because they do have usually like character sketches. They usually have like, extra script. They have, some ideas and other story, so it is really cool to see that they embrace the story. IDW embraced the story enough, because they're the ones who originally came out with the smaller format.
Yeah.
So then they said, you know what, let's double down on this and put everything we've got into a larger format print.
Sure, and the editor Scott, he was very much the big helping Darwin Cook with the property, help him get to where he needed to be, and then they were like, "Hey, do you want to do this in a bigger format?" And they're like, "Yeah, let's do it." So you got to um, hear some of the conversations they put together with between him, Darwin Cook, um, Ed Brubaker, Bruce Tim comes up, and yeah, Scott's in it too. He's the one that's moderating, and there's a few other people that are mentioned and stuff, and it's really cool because you get to that feel about what was Darwin going through, what was though he had a rough patch with Edward Baker where he didn't talk to him for 7 years. So it was really cool that he admired while he was there on that hiatus. When Criminal was coming out, he's like, "Hey, that's a good job. And he gave him some notes and stuff that really affect how that book came out.
Wow.
So that was really cool to like hear some of those interviews about that, his time and Bruce Timm talks about like his time at when he was working with on Batman animated series and Superman, and they were working on the Spirit. That's how he kind of interact with his editor, and just a lot of cool stories that I would have never known unless I read this too. Cook was a very stern guy, but he also liked to have fun. He's always at a con. That's where they would get a lot of their ideas and just network a bit. Had a lot of friends and just the close friends, and really was a big person in the comic book community. He's definitely huge.
Yeah, I mean, he was easily one of the most well respected through the community.
A very big pillar. Yeah.
And he really did push the idea of like, yes, my artwork is different and it looks different, but it's still as respected as anyone else's art because, he is thinking about, use of the page and, the graphic nature of it all and, how the story moves along. And I think for me, Darwyn Cooke, I mean, the first thing you notice when you flip through any of is the art, like just jumps. It just immediately jumps. And really, really, really well done.
Yeah. So that was super cool. Again, we talked about, for this, the last call, Ed Brubaker did a story called Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. And this was cool because he did it I think this last year when the pandemic was going on, he worked on this story. And that's how he kind of built that out. And so when this edition was coming, they were like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." He was very big, close friend, Darwyn Cooke's. And this was kind of cool because it's like in a movie or series or something where they do it like years later or down the road, like an aftermath story, an epilogue kind of thing. And so he kind of does that where like there was a particular heist they did and he hid the money somewhere, but they couldn't remember where they hid it. So his one of his best friends that, he's in the outfit and the score, he's still alive. Parker has disappeared and he doesn't really remember. He's trying to remember all like where they hid it and things like that. It takes him years and years and years to find it. And then something happens. I won't spoil it all the way in case you do pick this up, but it was really tasteful to both the character and the artist. So it was a good way to send it off. And yeah, just the way Brubaker in this forward and stuff, where he talks about his friend Darwyn Cooke, was really touching and definitely worth checking out. So yeah, the last thing, and this was also like the last thing like Darwyn Cooke worked on at IDW and comics in general. This was like pretty much his last thing. So that was a really cool way to like, this was the definitive thing. So yeah, he had plans to do more stuff with Parker. I think the next story he's going to work on was Butcher's Moon. So you can always look up what that would have been and continue with the series. So he was always still planning ahead. He had things in the works, but I think it was cancer that really done him in. So yeah.
And as the time of the recording, these Parker editions, the first one's hard to find now, right? Yeah.
It's not bad. It's a little hard, but yeah.
But the second one is still pretty new and coming in and out.
Yep. So whatever format you can enjoy the story, do it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We highly recommend it. I even found these editions on Hoopla. They actually had them as well. So
digitally.
Yeah.
Good. Digitally that would be great. I think this story is a good palate cleanser too. If you've been reading something that's like oh, I'm going to start reading all the issues of X-Men or something. You know,
Yeah,
if you're,
and that's what I was did.
oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's
I
right.
was in the middle of like a X-Men run, and I was reading some manga. I was reading. I'm on Attack on Titan right now, and I was like, oh, what can we read? You know, do we want to do some Marvel or DC?
It's a good
And
jump in between. It's a good to reinvigorate
they
you
were
and
sitting on the
bring you
shelf.
back.
I was
Yeah.
like, hey, we've been talking about this for a long time. Let's break them out.
And I was like, I don't have those, but the library does. So everyone, check your library. Know what they have, because you'd be surprised. They had all 4 of these in great condition, and they do have them marked adult graphic novel, but at the same time, it was just really easy read. So
Yeah.
see what you got, see what you can find, and maybe some people got some extra gift cards laying around, and go get yourself some books.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a wrap here on this great episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is Andrew Bonner
And Chris Ramos
signing off.
Goodbye, Darwyn.